So welcome everyone to our Tuesday meditation class, and a special welcome to those who are new today. Generally our schedule gives us about half an hour for some meditation, and after that then I have a little bit of a wisdom talk, which is a continuation of talking about, I suppose, how to find mindfulness and happiness in the workplace. But for those of you who are new to meditation today, I will give a little bit of an introduction to what exactly meditation is all about. And you probably have heard great things about meditation, about all the wonderful things it can do for you. Hence, you want to find out about how to meditate, perhaps, so that you can take those methods home with you and apply them in your own lives. And it's true that meditation does something very useful for us, which not much else we come across in the course of our everyday lives helps within quite the same way. And that is that it works with a part of us that is often neglected. Often when it comes to our physical health, it's pretty obvious when we are in need of some sort of change in our lives in order to get healthier. But for a part of ourselves that's not so easy to see, which means our mind, sometimes it's not so obvious what to do about it. And meditation offers us a way in which to work with that part of ourselves called our mind in a way that perhaps we can use our mind in a little bit more of a cheerful and efficient way. The trouble with our mind is firstly that we can't see it. It's not like our brain or our nervous system, but it's more like the software which runs in our brain or our nervous system. And it's not restricted to just inside our head, but it can be pulled away to all the busy things happening in our lives. All the things that are competing for our attention, which in this day and age are quite a lot. And some people have even gone so far as to say we have all these things going on in our lives that take our mind hostage. So it's a question of how can we pull back our mind from all of those things back to a more calm and peaceful place within ourselves in order to get some downtime, in order to recharge our mind in perhaps the same way we'd find the charger cradle for our mobile phone at the end of the day. So you can use your mobile phone all day long, but at the end you have to have some time to charge it up again, ready for the next day. And in the same way, we need to have a place like that for our mind as well. And the theory behind meditation says that there's a special place where if we can get our mind to go there, it will be particularly efficient for recharging and replenishing the energies of the mind. And this place is somewhere in the middle of our body. Doesn't need to be exactly there, although there are two crosshairs on the little diagram, but somewhere in the general area of our stomach, somewhere that feels relaxed, somewhere on the level of our diaphragm. Officially speaking, it's called the solar plexus, but anywhere in that general area, if we can get our attention to be there rather than caught up in things around us, then immediately we will feel a sense of relaxation, and we'll feel that the number of thoughts in our mind is starting to sort of settle down and reconnect with a sense of peace inside us. So how exactly would we get our mind to go there, especially when we can't see it? Well, the answer to that question is that we put a little anchor in the mind that we can see in the form of some sort of picture in our imagination. So it might be something bright and rounded, like, for example, a picture of the sun shining. Yeah? Can you think of that? But what we do with that picture is that we take it and we place it inside our body, down there in the center of ourselves, or anywhere that feels comfortable for us. If you're more of a touchy-feely sort of person, it might be more of a feeling that the sun is inside you rather than a picture of it, and that will work just fine as well. What your mind will try to do is try to go back to all those interesting things around you again, in which case you just bring it back again. If the picture disappears, then you can just conjure up a new one. And that will normally train the mind little by little to become more centered and more where it needs to be reconnected with that sense of peace inside you. Some people have an additional distraction for the mind in the form of a lot of thoughts. And generally, if you have a lot of thoughts on your mind, for a meditation, we prefer that the thoughts become quieter. And it's true that if you leave them long enough without stirring them up anymore, then they will become quieter on their own. Rather like sediment in muddy water, in a barrel of water, let's say, if you don't stir it anymore, then the mud will settle out. But for some people, there are so many thoughts that it's hard to know what to do with them. Just leaving them alone doesn't seem to work to make them go away. In which case, you may find a little trick useful for reducing the number of thoughts in the mind, which is to use something known as a mantra, which is a silent word or phrase repeated over and over silently in the mind as a way to cut through the thoughts. And in our tradition, we use the words Samma Arahang, which you can see spelled out there, that mean the pure state of mind achieved in the proper way. But in effect, you can use any equivalent, inspiring affirmation which you have prepared earlier in place of those words, in case it's easier for you to remember. Something simple might be brighter and brighter, clearer and clearer, for example. Or it might be something from your own spiritual tradition. But you can use that, and you find that the thoughts will reduce more quickly if you use the mantra. So what I'm going to do is lead you through meditation for about 20 minutes, and you should try to sit comfortably if you can. If you're on a chair, then try to sit up fairly straight, not bolt upright, but at least sort of vaguely awake. If you're sitting cross-legged on a mat, then generally one would sit in a half lotus with just the right foot up on the calf of the left leg, or a looser cross-legged variation of that. You notice that the word comfort is the key. Yes, not in for sort of torture or self-mortification practices. And the way to put the hands, ideally, is with the right hand on top of the left hand, index finger of the right hand touching against the thumb of the left hand, and our hands just rest palm upwards on our lap. And the idea of putting the thumb and finger together is that if you ever get sleepy, then your finger tends to slip out of place, giving you a little bit of an advance warning before the rest of you slips out of place. So far, so good. So we'll sit for meditation for about a half an hour. So if you'd like to start by finding a comfortable position for yourself in meditation, a position of poise by which you feel you could sit for a long, long time without having to move around too much. Your hands rest palm upwards on your lap so that you have a fairly upright posture. And you can close your eyes very gently, in much the same way you might close your eyes to go to sleep. So to relax and to slow down, we start by taking a few deep breaths to ourselves, breathing in to the full extent of our lungs, before breathing slowly and smoothly out again. Once again, we breathe in the cool, refreshing air from around us. And as we breathe out, we may feel that we're letting go of any previous worries or concerns at the same time. From there, we take a few moments to make sure that all the muscles of our body are properly relaxed. A process otherwise known as a body scan, starting at the top of our head and working our way gradually down through our body, relaxing each and every muscle as we go. So we start by relaxing our eyebrows and our eyelids. Once again, making sure the way we've closed our eyes is as gentle as possible. Closed in much the same way we might close our eyes to go to sleep. As for the muscles of our face, we allow them to become soft, perhaps smiling slightly to ourselves, but taking care that our jaw is relaxed and that we're not clenching our teeth together. Before moving on down to relax the muscles of our neck. If our shoulders are tense, we allow them to drop to their natural height. Before relaxing our arms, forearms, our hands and fingers. So that as our hands rest in our lap, they seem to do so only very lightly. Continuing on down, we relax all the muscles of our torso, our chest, trunk, and the muscles across our belly. Before relaxing both of our legs, all the way down to our feet and our toes. Until eventually all the way from the top of our head, right the way down to the tips of our toes, there's no remaining part of our body with any sort of stress or tension anymore. If we do notice any tension remaining, then we do our best to relax it as far as possible, to leave us with a sensation that the whole of our body seems to have melted away into the atmosphere around us, leaving no sense of discomfort in our body anymore, so that we can turn our attention inwards to the sensation of warmth, well-being, and spaciousness within the space of our body. Something which by any other name we might call our state of mind. And our state of mind is also something that needs to be as relaxed as possible to pave the way for the meditation ahead. The usual way to relax the mind is by letting go of all the normal things that we tend to worry about in our lives. No matter whether it's thoughts of work, friends, family, or studies. We put all of these thoughts on one side for now, at least for the time that we're meditating together. If you do have particular things which seem rather important to think about, then again you can put them on one side for now, making a mental note that you can always come back to worry about them later. We also let go of any regrets from our past or plans for the future. And what that leaves us with is the present moment and the task in hand, which is a space in our lives that we've created for ourselves only by taking a great deal of trouble. It's not that often that we get to recharge the batteries of the mind. It's only by gathering together with our fellow meditators that we can really focus on making sure our mind is properly relaxed. So we try to make the most of this opportunity, bringing our mind back from 1,000 different things in the outside world to a single place of stillness on the inside. Because it's almost as if on the inside there is a sense of peace. Somewhere at the center of our being, which was probably there all along, but which up until now we've failed to notice. But as we bring our attention back from all the distractions in the outside world, we engage with this inner feeling of peace more and more, to the point where the whole sense of peace on the inside seems to pervade every last molecule of our being. To the point where there's no space left in our mind for any other sort of thought. And when we feel relaxed and refreshed, both in body and in mind, very gently, and using no effort at all, we can imagine that inside our body is just an empty space or a hollow cavity. Or if we prefer, we might think of our whole body as being transformed somehow into a sort of transparent bubble with nothing on the inside. For those who have been meditating longer, it may seem as if our body has disappeared entirely, leaving just some great empty space, but a space that we know is our own. But whatever form this inner space takes, the space within our body, again, very gently and without rushing the process at all, we can remember back to that picture of the bright, shining sun, which we had a few moments ago. Maybe yellow or red in color, orange or white. But this time, instead of appearing in the sky, the bright sun appears within the space of our body, shining with a cool, clear light. A light which is soft perhaps rather similar to that of the full moon, rather than the sun itself. And in the beginning, the actual picture may not be very clear to us, but we accept it anyway. Even if it's rather vague, we hold that image in our mind as continuously as we can, for as long as we can, while trying to avoid letting the mind spin off into any other distractions. However, if we do notice that the mind has become distracted, perhaps by external noise, as soon as we realize, we simply bring it gently back again to the center of the body as before. If the inner object disappears, we can always think of a new one. And apart from that, we just maintain the object as continuously as we can for as long as we can. Possibly using our feeling in the case that we seem to feel the image rather than seeing it. The other possible problem that may come up in meditation is an excess of thought. And for many people, the stream of thoughts in the mind is almost continuous, to the extent that it's quite hard to find a single break in the thoughts, to give ourselves that sense of peace and quiet. In such a case, to open up a space between the thoughts in the mind, we might make use of something known as a mantra, which is basically a word that we repeat to ourselves silently, as if we hear the sound of the word coming up from the center of our inner object. The traditional mantra that goes with this meditation method are the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang. And we hear the sound of those words coming up as if like a silent music from the center of ourselves, from the center of the bright object, over and over again, gently encouraging the mind to become free of thought, while at the same time linking our awareness more closely with this point at the center of ourselves. And it's also worth mentioning that we need to be as gentle as possible with the mind while we're meditating, because any trace of force, any temptation to rush, needs to be put on one side as something which is not helpful for our meditation progress. What we need to use in the meditation is a sense of lightness, a sense of openness, and allowing things to happen on their own, rather than feeling that we have to create experiences in the mind. So now, for a few more moments in silence, we cultivate our attention at the center of the body, keeping it on target with our bright object at our center, possibly while also repeating the sound of the mantra to ourselves, Samma Arahang, for as long as there are remaining thoughts in the mind. So now we take a few more moments for us to practice on our own in silence until we come to the appropriate time. forget if your mind wanders off onto other things each time you realize. Simply bring your awareness back again to the center of the body as before. If the inner object disappears, you can conjure up a new one. But if it changes, you just follow it in its new form. And your practice may turn into something more of an observation practice rather than a visualization as a result. If there are still thoughts popping up in the mind, and the thoughts are few and far between, try to take more notice of the spaces between the thoughts and allow those thoughts to die down into silence all by themselves. But if the number of thoughts is too many to deal with simply by letting them become more peaceful, then we can always make use of that traditional mantra, hearing the sound of the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, over and over again in the mind, until our thoughts become more manageable. The important thing about meditation, apart from our gentleness with which we apply the mind, is a sense of continuity, a sense of consistency. We keep our mind on track in this way, lightly, gently and consistently, for a few more moments now in silence until we come to the appropriate time. ปิพุทธาปลปัฏฐาปัจเจกานัญจยบาลังอรหันตานัจจเตเชนะอราคัมบันธามิสัพพโสสัพพุทธานุภาเวนะสัพพธัมมานุภาเวนะสัพพสังฆานุภาเวนะสัทธาโสธีภาวันตุเท So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for this evening, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gradually finishing your practice. So far, so good, everyone. And new folks, got on okay with meditation? Not too difficult, I hope. Well, if there's anything you want to ask about, you can always ask about at the end. Yes. But for today, I will pick up where I left off last Thursday, which was the introduction to a subject of, I suppose you could say, spirituality in working life. And it's part of a series of teachings which I've been giving that start from fairly mundane sort of habits and practices and work towards more esoteric and transcendental ones. And at the moment, we are looking at the sort of practices and values which prepare the readiness of the mind to be more receptive to transcendental teachings. And although I've talked about working life several times along the way through these sequence of talks, in the old days it used to be just talking about not being too reluctant to work hard in your workplace, or mastering your craft if you're working on something, to show your skills in your working life to get that sort of job satisfaction. But by this point in the blessings, which is blessing number 18, we're starting to talk more about the ethics of one's working life. And last Thursday I talked about something called right livelihood, which means trying to be a little bit selective about the sort of nature of the work which one is doing, so that it conforms as much as possible with one's conscience. So to do something to change the world in a good way through the work that one is doing, more than just being a salary. But the second part, which I'll continue with today, is also about blameless work. It's not so much on the ethics anymore, because I think I probably have gone into enough detail on that already, but it's more about things like how we get along well with our co-workers, so that our work is also blameless in the way that we get along with others in the workplace in order to avoid personal conflicts and that sort of thing. So irrespective of the nature of the work you do, you need to cultivate good human relationships, otherwise you might also risk blame in the workplace and undermine either your own or other people's job satisfaction as a result. So let's start with the sort of Western way of looking at relationships in the workplace. And there was a software CEO called Jim Belosic, who offered 5 secrets for developing a better working relationship with your manager, because productive and respectful relationships between a manager and their employees is key to any company's success. So while the manager's top priority might be sort of hard-working employees who fulfill the company vision, it's probably safe to say they'd also like to have more than superficial relationships with their employees every day. Because after all, they probably spend more time with you lot than they do even with their own families. So also there's something in it for the employees too, because the manager usually plays quite an important role in your opportunities for advancement. So the more they know you and your work ethic, then the more likely you are to do well in your career path. So a good and a healthy, respectful relationship with your employer and your manager can improve your morale and also productivity, and ultimately your career. So if you want a relationship that gets beyond like, we get along fine, then you might try some of the following suggestions. So firstly, it might be down to you to take the initiative to set up at least monthly meetings with your employer. If it's a small business, then maybe you meet up with one another quite a lot anyway, but if it's a larger one, you may need to take more of the initiative. Because especially if it's quite a large outfit that you work for, then it might be difficult for a manager to check in with every employee every day. So they have no idea really what you're working on. So it's important that you take the initiative yourself to set up individual meetings with your boss. And it helps you know what's going on in the business and shows that you care about your job and what the goals and expectations you have in your mind. And it's good because it creates time to talk about the things that you're working on and present your ideas for the future, and to check to make sure that you're still on track with whatever your manager's goals and strategies are. Second thing is that demonstrating innovation and initiative may be a good thing. Or depending on your manager, it might be good to pretend that all the innovation and so on is your boss's idea. But not being afraid to raise your hand and volunteer something new is generally seen as a good thing. It shows that you're contributing something. Having open communication allows for you to give feedback on your boss's ideas, which may or may not be a good idea depending on their personality, but it's one way to get to learn about their personality also. But by open communication, it means that both sides are open to the other's feedback. And although you may be the employee, but generally you're also the specialist, and you are in touch with the reality of the working life more than someone who is managing you, because they are looking more at the figures and they're sitting in their office rather than being involved with whatever it is that your workplace is producing. So actually, if they are quite an open-minded sort of manager, they ought to be keen to listen to what you have to say, because firstly, your training may have been more up-to-date than theirs. Also, you may be more of a true specialist than they are in certain subjects that you work for, where they would be more generalist and just be looking out for a variety of different people who work for them. Sometimes it may be also appropriate to be more informal with your boss. Allowing for them to show that you care about them as a person rather than just as a person who sort of controls your career prospects. Yeah. And also, you ought to be able to feel that you can be yourself at work. This may mean being open about possible things that might encroach on your ability to do your job without sort of presenting yourself as weak somehow. But if they know about other things going on in your life, then they may be able to adapt your work load in order that you can avoid any trouble that's brewing outside the office for you in other aspects, whether it's something you're studying for, you need time to do revision for exams, or there may be some drama going on in your family that you can tell them about that maybe they can allow for in your workload as well. So allowing you to be yourself or to make for a productive working relationship. I throw these in because the advice that's passed down from the Buddhist tradition, which you might realize is like about 2,000 years old, comes from a very different time and a very different sort of set of relationships between boss and employee. You know how it's different? Well, in the old days, if you were employed by someone, generally you lived on site at your workplace. So your boss not only gave you work, but they also basically looked after your whole living arrangements as well. Most people would have their whole family with them in their place of work. So actually most of the advice goes quite deep in terms of the boss almost treating their employees like extended family. But a lot of this advice may also be relevant in the present day and age. So this teachings actually come from a part of the Buddhist scriptures called the Sigalovada Sutta, which you may have heard of, the 6 directions in Buddhism. And this is one of the directions, which is the relationship between employer and employee. Because also we pick up a lot of habits which may be relevant to our spiritual cultivation from the way we do our work. So the first of these is to allocate appropriate work, which means that an employer ought to take into account a person's age, health, disposition, and capability in the task which they delegate to that employee, given that for each person it might not be quite the same, but for their work to be rewarding, then it ought to be something that's appropriate to them. For example, I once heard in Belgium that when one of their employees was pregnant, then they gave them a completely different set of tasks to do at work, which didn't involve heavy lifting, for example. Which I thought was a nice touch. Secondly, to give appropriate food and remuneration. So thinking back to living on site, then the catering arrangements ought to be also adequate. And it also brings up a point which is a little bit different between Asian and Western work culture, to do with a remuneration, which is, I don't know about in the UK, but certainly in the US, unless you bring up the subject of a raise in pay, you will not get one. How about UK? Okay, a little bit more Asian style. In Asian style, you have to look like you could do with a raise in pay before you get one. And they have to guess? No? So you get it automatically? Or not at all, maybe? Okay, so you can complain about the structure not being clear, or you cannot complain. Except complaints are not acceptable? No. So a little bit more like Asia then. Yes, in Asia you don't bring up this subject. But it's down to the manager being a generous sort of person who feels noblesse oblige, and they ought to be paying valuable people more without having to be asked about it. Yes. So there you go. UK is a little bit closer to Asian style culture. Third thing is taking care of employees in times of illness. In the US, it would be what's known as a generous healthcare plan, and also not being asked to take health risks in the course of your working duties. Not being paid danger money, in other words. Fourth one, quite cute in some ways, from time to time to give your employees delicacies. Delicacies? Yes. I think it's probably what in the modern day might translate as bonuses, or maybe prizes for employee of the month from time to time. Yeah, delicacies. And being allowed holidays on occasion. So usual working calendar and national festivities and on request. So any employer who looks after the employees in these nice, cute ways, then they would be looked up to by their employees, in theory, in a way that they would want to keep up their side of the bargain. So what is the employee side of the bargain? You notice that mostly for these teachings from the Sigalawada Sutta, it's not about rights, it's about mutual duties towards one another. And it's hoped that both sides in any particular pair will keep up their side of the bargain. So what are employees supposed to do for all this nice treatment? They're supposed to start work before their employer and finish work after them. So how about teachers? Who arrives in the school first in the morning? Okay, so good for you. And probably they're marking homework long after everyone else has gone home as well. Second thing is, yes, for before and after. Third thing is only taking things expressly given to you by your boss. They have a thing called petty workplace theft these days, is the current terminology for it. And these days it seems to have moved on from occasional office supplies to much more serious crimes like embezzlement, data theft, identity theft, or have you heard of sweethearting? Yeah, well, you learned something. I also learned something as well. Basically, it means, let's say you work at the checkout in the supermarket. If you know some of the customers, you can constantly give them coupons or reductions on things because you know them. So you are their sweetheart sort of thing. Yes, and not allowed. Yes, they're not considered behaviors worthy of a trustworthy employee. You should look for ways to do your work better than before, improve your efficiency, and not try to use it as a bargaining chip to negotiate wage rises. And last but not least, try to maintain and defend your boss's or manager's good reputation. If both sides are maintained, then generally work-place relationships will be quite cordial. But obviously, if one side or the other doesn't live up to their side of the bargain, then there will be a breakdown of relationships, in which case you come to problems which are better avoided where possible. So, in the case that one side or the other does not keep up their side of the bargain, then obviously it needs to be moved on to the next stage, and sometimes it can get quite ugly and destructive. If people are paid by the hour, then they go on a go slow. If they are paid on piece rate pay, then they turn in shoddy work as a protest. If they can do a lot of other things to try to create friction for their employer, like things like data theft, which I mentioned earlier. Employers can get nasty too. They can do more monitoring and surveillance and make their life for their employees increasingly unpleasant. As I said, it's better if these can be avoided before it happens. If employees are not very satisfied with their working life, it's actually bad for everyone, because they would tend to take their pleasures elsewhere in a more destructive way. And one way or another, it tends to lead to debt problems, and debt is never seen as a good thing, especially in Buddhist culture. Some people think that if you're a Buddhist, you have to try to be poor. What do you reckon? Well, for monks it's all right, okay, to be poor. But generally speaking, it's not seen as a good thing to be poor. It's to be sort of reasonably comfortable, so that you have the flexibility and time and lack of worry so that you can do more spiritual things in your life. So debt is seen as a particularly insidious problem with poverty. Yeah, so not to be encouraged. Today I'll finish with a little story, and it goes back a little bit to the ethics I was talking about last Thursday. And it's about honesty and dishonesty in the workplace. And it comes from a part of the scriptures quite early on, called the Seriwa Jataka. And you notice it comes in at number 3, so quite an early lifetime of the Bodhisattva when he was working his way towards being a Buddha in the future. And the Buddha-to-be is sometimes known as the Bodhisattva, so the one seeking for enlightenment. And during that particular lifetime, he had a job as a door-to-door salesman. Not selling encyclopedias, no, but he would go house to house, sometimes selling goods and trinkets, and sometimes buying goods and trinkets from that the householders offered him. And one day, along with another rather more greedy door-to-door salesman, he crossed a river and entered a city called Andapura. And in that city, there was a family that had fallen on hard times. And the sole survivors in the family were a girl and her grandmother. And the greedy salesman, so not the Bodhisattva, he went around the town, and also the honest one, the Bodhisattva, went around town also selling the wares. And the Bodhisattva came to, when once the little girl saw these salesmen were out and about, then she begged her grandmother to be able to buy a trinket or two from the salesman. But all they had to pay for it with was a very old-looking golden-colored bowl, which they believed was gold-plated. In fact, the bowl was a family heirloom that was solid gold, but they didn't realize that, because it had lost its luster, and neither the old woman or the granddaughter realized its value. So first of all, the greedy salesman turned up at the door, and in return for one of his or two of his trinkets, he was shown the bowl, which would be given in exchange. And he scratched it with a needle, and he knew it was solid gold underneath. But because he wanted to have it for nothing, he said it wasn't worth half a farthing, and he made a show of throwing it down and stomping out of the house. A little bit later on, the honest door-to-door salesman came along, the Bodhisattva, and he was offered the same bowl in return for some of his trinkets. And unlike the previous salesman, he told the lady and the granddaughter the truth, and he said that if you want to give me this in payment, then I'm going to give you everything I have to sell here, and all the money I have, just keeping back the money to pay the ferryman on the way back. So he gave them his entire stock in exchange for this bowl, and just had 8 pieces of money for the journey back. And then he made his way quickly down to the docks and boarded a boat to cross the river. Meanwhile, the greedy salesman went back the second time to the house in the hope of that the 2 ladies had changed their mind, and when he found out that they'd already done the sale on the golden bowl, he went what they would call ballistic, and he threw down everything he had and ran directly down to the river, calling out to the honest salesman, who was now midstream, stop, come back, you can't do this. And eventually he had a heart attack, yes, and did not die in a good way. In fact, he was very vengeful as he was dying, and that vengefulness actually went on to carry over for many lifetimes. So, have you heard of someone called Devadatta? A particularly sort of badly behaved monk in the final lifetime of the Buddha. He did some naughty things, like trying to get an elephant drunk to stamp on the Buddha, and throwing boulders down a mountain on top of the Buddha, a few naughty things like that in his final lifetime. Well, apparently it started back in that lifetime with being the honest and the dishonest salesman. So sort of an aside to this story is, don't underestimate the danger of vengefulness, because especially if you die with that sort of emotion on your mind, it will carry over for a long time. It's very hard to overcome it at all. Yes, so workplace honesty, that's what that story is supposed to demonstrate today. For those of you who are new to meditation today, I'd like to encourage you to meditate further if you can, and a good place to start is maybe by finding 20 minutes a day at home to meditate. Maybe first thing in the morning, maybe last thing at night, but if you start with 20 minutes, then that's a length of time where you'll start to see some progress for yourself day by day. You may have good days, you may have bad days, but on aggregate you will see a gradual improvement in your practice. And if you become more inspired by your practice, then you can gradually increase on that length of time as well. Generally, once you know the method, then you will go home, be inspired to practice, and generally that inspiration will last about 7 days, after which it will sort of wear off. There's this sort of 7-day rule, which they know about in all the religious traditions, which is one of the reasons why they ask you to go to church every Sunday, for example. So, to remind yourself of the meditation method, there's an app which you can download and listen to audio tracks on, which will help to keep your inspiration going, hopefully. And you can set a timer in 20 minutes, find a meditation instruction to fit with the time which you've set for yourself. Also, we have classes going on here normally on every Tuesday and Thursday evening, but these will be suspended during the month of August and pick up again in September. But saying that, anyone who's really intent on coming to the temple can probably join in sitting at the back from 6 o'clock onwards. There's usually evening chanting and meditation. So if you really want to come to meditation, you're always welcome to drop in and meditate. Either then or any other time of the day, then we do have a little white room where you can go and meditate in peace and quiet, hopefully, as well. Also online, which I do believe will continue regardless every Saturday evening, online via Zoom, between 7 and 8 British time. There's a talk and meditation held for meditators throughout Europe, which some of you are already familiar with. Our next weekend retreat, coming up probably here, will be between 16th and 18th of September. Usually they charge just £75 for the weekend, which is fairly Spartan accommodation. You can see left and right here, 2 meals a day, but it is nice and close to home. The reason why we are busy during August is that we are giving our pastoral care and training to the youngsters who have time out of school. So for the boys, that they'll actually be reporting in for duty on Friday, and we hope to get to 10 youngsters, boys, in for the first 2 weeks. And you'll see them as novices around the middle of the month. The ordination should be actually about the 5th of August. Yeah. So they will be little monks for 2 weeks, and then they can change back and go back to school in September. Yes. For the ladies, it's a slightly shorter retreat schedule between the 26th and 28th, and we are combining the training for adults and for youngsters. So girls have got their own set of activities, so 10-year-olds upwards, with slightly more fun, slightly less meditation. For the adults, it's slightly less fun and more meditation. Yes, 26th to 28th. Also, I'd like to give a heads up for the almsgiving that we're doing in Jubilee Square in Woking on the 13th of August. If you're normally doing your shopping in Peacocks on the Saturday morning, then you can join in with that along the way. We haven't been able to organize that for a couple of years, but it's something that we've done in the past. This is the 4th time we're organizing it, but we have the new mayor joining us as well. It should be quite a good event. And all the food given to the monks during the almsgiving, including the novices as well, will then be donated to the food bank in Woking. And we have our temple open day on the very next day, which is Sunday the 14th of August, between 2:15 and 4. It's a chance for people who are normally too scared to come and look inside the temple to have a chance to satisfy their curiosity about what goes on here. Yes, indeed. So that's probably all for today, apart from saying a big thank you to those who filled in the questionnaires as well. I'll try to put all this together into some sort of report by October. I have to give a paper on that, so hopefully all the contributions you've made for that will come out as a sort of graph which will prove something by October. So for today, that's probably all I have for you, but if you have any questions, comments, or feedback at this point, I'd be very pleased to hear from you. All of you enjoy happiness, success, and prosperity in life, and enjoy satisfaction in your working life and cordial relationships between employer and employee now and forevermore.